A brand new object tells us who made it. An older object tells us who loved it. Welcome to our class on design and a little wabi-sabi. I was raised as an army brat, as some of you know, in Zweibrücken, Germany, and later we moved to Lahr and then Baden-Baden. And my father was enlisted in closing up the NATO bases that the Canadian Air Force was situated on, as Pierre Trudeau was aligning with the armed forces and closing down bases in Europe. So we would move quite frequently. And I was segregated because most places that we went to, they spoke German, and I was young enough that I wasn't really getting very good at it. So I was segregated by language, by ethnicity, and by a fair amount of military discipline that was coming from my household. And somewhere in that regimented world, my imagination went rogue and I created imaginary friends. And as I created my imaginary world, it just started growing and growing. And as a 5-year-old and 6-year-old, I started talking to my friends, and audibly even. And one day, when certain things were happening in my house, and it was quite chaotic, my imaginary friend said that she was leaving and going somewhere really nice, and she was just going to take off, and she would sometimes fly away and stuff, and so that kind of bothered me, and I ended up climbing onto the chicken coop that was in the back of this rental property that we were in, and deciding that I would jump off and flap my wings really fast and follow her, and likewise I got a scar across my chin to prove that I was not a bird. And my father, who was in the military, and used to military discipline, was not happy, nor was the base medics that he took me to. And there all this child tried to fly, and they kind of looked at him, which embarrassed him. And in those days, if your dad gets embarrassed by you, it's not a good day. So I was told, no more imagination. If I ever see you imagining anything, there's going to be consequences. No more pretending. You get down to your work, and you know all those things that a dad might say when they're perturbed by your behavior, and they're also worried by your injuries. But of course, my friends didn't go away. They just went inside. And those were the days of children should be seen and not heard. And I quickly became not seen and never heard. And I just hid away and became very insular and just figured out my own life. And slowly I would have this little radio. And again, going back into those days, we had a little transistor radio that we could dial. And when I was living in Germany, I would get the AFN network, which is your American Forces network. And it would come through my little radio. And just again, just one of those comic things is it had a 9-volt battery. Remember the 9-volt batteries in the back of your transistors? And it had one plug only that went into my ear from an RCA jack. And we would get a 9-volt battery for our birthday or Christmas sometimes. And that was a big gift, because then I could listen to the radio again. So I had this imaginary life, and then I tuned into things like, Janis Joplin, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, and Bob Dylan. And I just started imagining how wonderful it's going to be the day that I get to go back to North America and Canada and be in this country that has all of these fun things happening. And it would be just the best place in the world. Well, we got sent to Holberg, Vancouver Island, the northern tip of Vancouver Island, no houses, no anything, a helicopter radar base that's actually no longer even there. And I became quieter. Until one day, one of my teachers took me aside and said, I want you to join the drama class. I think you'd be great at drama. Of course, I cringed because no, I don't get seen. But she kind of forced me and said it was part of my marks, and she wanted me to get into this drama class. And I went to the first couple classes, and I was really, really quiet. And then they started saying, you have to be expressive, you have to talk out, you have to be loud. And I realized as I started being in the class that the louder I got, the more people actually applauded. And that was when something inside of my imagination and my creativity and my curiosity took place. And I realized it's not about hiding. It's about knowing who's your audience. And they might be out there or somewhere else. It's when I left Holberg, when we arrived at Holberg, I told you it wasn't quite where we thought we would be going. My mother had challenges by that time, and she was being heavily medicated by the military doctors. As soon as we arrived, the Canadian government thought it was wise to take my father and send him to Montreal because everybody should be bilingual. So my mother was left with 4 young kids on the island with really no resources. And it wasn't long, approximately 7 months, when she decided one night, because of other factors that were happening, to get into her car. And as a little 9-year-old girl, I tried to hold the mirror and tell her not to drive away because I sensed something was wrong. And she backed up anyways and went through the guard gate and drove off the bridge, thus changing our lives. She didn't die, but this was her 8th attempt of suicide. Throughout my life, when the sound barriers would break, she would huddle in a corner, and the 3 of us girls would gather around her and try to brace her up, and then she would take more pills. After she got rescued from the bridge, she was taken to the Vancouver hospital where Sharon Lancaster was the last woman, or man, last person in Canada to receive shock treatment, which actually immobilized a lot of her brain. And when she did return to us, approximately 9 months later, we had been transferred to Winnipeg for humanity reasons because we had my father's brother living in Winnipeg and my auntie, and it would be a better place for us to be. She no longer knew me or my sisters. It would only be 4 months later that we were taken out of the home and put into foster care. So I'm in a new country, I don't really speak the language, I've been going to American schools, and now I'm in foster care, and I didn't get along. And then I was put from the youth center, the Doncaster Youth Center. I was then put into group homes, my sister was sent to the Y, all these different things started happening, and eventually it led to me at my 13th year, turning 14 in 1 month, to get with my one older sister and head out on the highway number 1 and hitchhike to Vancouver and live on the streets for 2 years. During that time, I learned that brown paper bags outside of a schoolyard often have a good apple inside and maybe a peanut butter sandwich. But after 18 months on the streets, I started realizing something had to change, and it was at that time that I returned to Winnipeg and started learning and started really realizing and reading Carl Jung and Jessie Lair and different people and figuring out that things had to be different. And at 17 years of age, I started turning my life around. But what I'm here to say, if I can do it, as some people suggest, that I'm standing up here, I'm only standing up here as humble as everyone has all got their stories. And as I said, I have a tapestry, and that's what we all have behind of us, a story. And I share that story just as not to say this is where I came from, but to say this is where I've grown from. Because a growth mindset will take you anywhere. Thank you for spending this time with me. It has been my privilege to share with you. Namaste.